Can someone tell us how many people have been arrested in relation to the protests and on what charges?
I'll let Chief Piskinnis come up and address the crowd.
To date, there have been somewhere around 50 people arrested, just under 50, for a variety of offenses, from curfew to weapons charges, drug charges, illegal fireworks. I believe a suspect last night was arrested for possessing a flamethrower. Actually, that was the night before.
Question about Jacob Blake. Is he still currently being shackled to the hospital bed? Can someone clarify those reports?
I can tell you that he is and has been under the guard of an outside agency. I can't speak to that, and nobody here can.
Has anyone spoken to that agency?
What would be the agency? DOJ?
I can't speak to that. It's an outside law enforcement agency.
Is it standard practice policy to have someone like that?
It is. In an efforts to have an outside investigation in place, it's also very helpful, obviously, to have an outside agency guard that person for his protection and for liability reasons for the department.
Does it have anything to do with the outstanding warrant? That's my understanding, that was in place against him from July?
He's being guarded because he's under arrest, and yeah, it was for an outstanding warrant for third-degree sexual assault.
And a follow-up question, if I may. Can you tell us if the officers who responded to that call on Sunday knew of the outstanding warrant?
I can't speak. I believe that's why they were there, but I don't know specifically.
Would that have changed the nature of the response, knowing that someone had a history versus...
It would certainly be heightened awareness, but in this case, the altercation, and remember that I'm not aware of the details of this, is that there was some resisting in the basis of that contact and the arrest, so that's what changed the dynamics of it.
Do you know if the officers been interviewed yet by investigators?
I believe DCI has spoken with them, yes.
Have they gotten an idea of why he responded as he did on that call?
They do not share any details with me with the investigation until it's done.
I'm not sure if this question will be for you, for Sheriff Beth, but a number of people on the jail roster this morning were still in custody. I think it was 2 days after an arrest for being out after curfew, which I understand is a violation. Can you explain why? It seems rather long for violation, some people are asking.
You want to stick with the chief first?
Does anybody else have any more questions for Chief?
Yes, I would like to
Yes,
ask
sir.
a question.
Right here?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
so,
sir.
so this is in regards to what happened Tuesday night with the shooting. The suspect was seen on video walking away from the scene, presumably based on the position, with a body or someone on the ground behind him with an assault rifle, and he was able to leave the scene. He wasn't questioned. So just from a procedural standpoint, can you give us an idea on why that didn't happen, why he was able to leave the scene when presumably, or when people were actually heard on video as well saying, this man shot someone?
Sure, that's a good question. So to understand what happened that night and what you saw in the film, or the video clip there, you need to understand what was happening in the greater scheme of things. There were a lot of people in the area, a lot of people with weapons, and unfortunately, a lot of gunfire. So what the officers were walking into or driving into in this case was a shots fired complaint, not a shooting, not a person down complaint. We have had many of those over the course of this unfortunate event. So they're responding to that. They see somebody walking toward them with his hands up. That too isn't out of the ordinary given how the events have been going on. Many people, as I drove around, and others have explained, have seen the same thing. We have armed individuals out protesting or counter-protesting or simply walking around exercising their right, will put their hands up. So that's not, it might have been abnormal 2 weeks ago, it's no longer abnormal. So there was nothing to suggest that this person was involved in any criminal behavior. He continued, he made contact near the officer's door, and you can hear on the recording I heard that the officers are telling him to get out of the way. Clearly they're not seeing him as a suspect or a threat of any kind. He's allowed to leave, where he goes to Antioch and turns himself in because we have no idea that he's involved. The officers become focused on what they see down the road.
Was that a lapse in judgment?
What's that?
Was that a lapse in judgment to not stop him? Or
I would say not, given the circumstances, and again, as I said, 2 weeks ago, my answer might have been different, but right now, the totality of circumstances, nothing suggested this person or anybody else who was armed around them was the person. They're very unlikely to have heard any comments from the crowd next to the vehicles that were there, the radio traffic, the gunfire, the crowd.
A church group had its U-Haul pulled over $1,000 worth of relief supplies, including first aid kits. Snacks, water, and fire extinguishers were seized, but they have not been returned. What can you tell us about that?
I'm not aware of that incident.
Officer, at the initial shooting, were the police officer aware that there were 3 babies in the car when they fired on the suspect?
Are you referring back to the beginning of this?
Yes, I'm talking about the gentleman who was shot 7 times. There were 3 babies in the car. Did they understand there were 3 children in that car?
I can tell you once again that I don't have the details of that event, no matter how many times you ask the question. The details are in the hands of the DCI and not me.
Can you tell us
Sir,
the
right here.
information, or
Right
can you
on the floor right
confirm?
here. Go ahead, sir.
No, generally speaking, like clearly the kid was underage, he was 17 years old. What is the rule? I mean, it had an officer who, had an officer caught that from the get-go. I mean, this may have not have happened. Like, what is the general rule of thumb about checking IDs? I mean, do officers do that in that regard?
So again, back to 2 weeks ago, it was very likely that that would have been done, given the vast number of people out, some people wearing masks, some not. The appearance of people, we don't have, I can't really answer that in current context, because now there's so many. He wasn't clearly an underage person. I think if you saw a small child with one, we could do that, but it's very difficult to try to ascertain that there is an age issue when it's that close.
Militia members have told me that without exception, law enforcement officers were friendly to them as they walked around with semi-automatic weapons in the streets that night. Did that have anything to do with the fact that the now accused shooter was able to walk right past deputies, and now there's an extradition fight out of Illinois?
I can't speak to that. I believe everybody out there in law enforcement has been friendly to both sides. And I can tell you that as there is no reason to disbelieve what I just said about not knowing this person was a suspect, that had any role in it.
Can you tell us next question right here in the back of the room?
Can you tell us how Rittenhouse got the gun, and are any more people going to be charged in that particular case?
I don't have any details as to how he obtained the gun. I know we're following up on a number of things, and if there are other violations, certainly we have to.
Two more questions for Chief Miskinnis, right over here. Right over here.
Chief, has Kyle Rittenhouse been questioned yet? And I know you said that you didn't know what led up to this shooting, but it's been a number of days, and there's a lot of video. So how is that, I guess, possible?
Well, as in most homicide cases, they take days. It also takes the cooperation of the person involved. If they invoke their right to an attorney, we may not get that information. I can't speak to what the details were about his motive, because I do not know.
Final question for Chief Miskinnis right here.
Chief?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Chief, what is the department policy as regards to use of force in situations where a person that is accused of or suspected of a crime is fleeing from officers, and what is the state law under which you operate?
We follow the Department of Justice. There's a training and standards, confrontational force continuing. It has a host of number of things, but there's a hierarchy. And the level of force that can be used is that level that is sufficient to take a person into custody and take that effect. So depending upon what action the person who is being arrested takes, that drives the level of force used by the officer.
Are they required to use deadly force in the event someone's fleeing?
Are they required? No, and I don't believe that there was a deadly force used for fleeing.
Chief, can you tell us about the
That's the
situation
final
with the
question for Chief Miskinnis. Does anybody have questions for Sheriff Beth?
I have the one from earlier about arrest. I'll reiterate the question. There was a number of arrests obviously throughout the week, and some people have been held, according to the jail roster, for 2+ days after being arrested for violating curfew. We had some questions about that being rather long for a violation. Can you explain why people held that long?
I don't know. I truthfully don't know who's in there. I know there are a few curfew ones, but they have to post bond, and they also have to provide proper identification. We have to be able to know who they are. So if they've not done either of those two, then they might have to appear in court. And right now, court's a little bit delayed, but so that might answer your question, but I don't know of a specific circumstance.
And a follow-up, can you explain why bail is being paid in the scene rather than Kenosha? We learned about that this morning.
Probably just for the safety of everybody coming to it. We're sending them to Racine. truthfully, that's the first I heard of it because I've been dealing with so many other things that wasn't the priority for me to do that.
Over here, does anybody have any questions for the sheriff?
Do you
Right
have
back
any
here.
information on whether Kyle Rittenhouse's mother drove him to Wisconsin, and will she face consequences?
I actually was asked that question this morning, and it's the first I heard of it. I don't know. I didn't know that she did. Again, we're not investigating that part. We all, and I know we've kind of said this, but we all have different roles in this entire situation. That investigation is not under in my world.
Right in the back, blue shirt, blue hat?
No, that was
Did
part,
you-
that's part.
Okay, all right. Yes, sir, you have a question?
Sheriff, have you seen the video that has circulated around of officers or law enforcement that were offering bottles of water and saying, we appreciate you to some, armed individuals?
That one,
walking around?
I was asked about a few different ones today, and truthfully,
Yeah.
I've watched no social media, I've watched no news broadcasts, I've not read any papers since last week. So, but that one I did see.
Yeah.
And it's an armored car, it says sheriff on it. It wasn't one of our Bearcats. Right now, we have 19 armored vehicles here that are all being utilized. It wasn't one of ours, but as the chief pointed out, and one of the, and I don't know, I'm not a techie person, I don't do Facebook. But one of the people that was videotaping said, it sounds like they were out in Portland too, and they commented on how friendly the law enforcement was here in Wisconsin. Well, I don't know if I take that as a compliment or not, but the fact that one of our people who are here threw a bottle of water to someone walking down the street, I understand that part. His comment that he made, it doesn't mirror all of law enforcement's perspective on what happened. This group of people that are carrying weapons here, if they're in their house, and again, I support the Second Amendment. If they're in there protecting their property, I have no issue with that. And the people that have been here carrying guns, they haven't been arrested because it's a right that they have. Have we asked for them to come? Are we asking for them to come in and support things? I'm not. One of the things is you could clearly see the situation escalated Tuesday night because a 17-year-old boy carrying what appears to be an assault rifle, who has no idea how to handle a situation like this. I don't care if he had the right intentions or not. 2 people are currently dead, and one almost had his arm blown off. So the comments that whoever was in that armored vehicle said, it does not reflect what we here in Kenosha are asking for. We have, as you heard the general say, we've got a lot of military personnel. We have a lot of law enforcement personnel from throughout the state, throughout the Midwest, and truthfully, we have them from throughout the country here right now to help protect Kenosha.
Were you anticipating the groups?
Can you tell us what the status is of the 9 people who were arrested this week in relation to the situation at a Speedway gas station? It sounds like they had Odyssey.
That wasn't
plates.
us.
Was that Kenosha Police?
It was.
Can you talk about that, Chief?
Why don't you guys stick with one person at a time, and that way we can wrap it up. And I don't mean to cut you off. I think the chief probably could answer that.
Right here.
The 50 people who were arrested for protest-related charges, can you tell in general where they're from? Are they from in town, out of town?
I've heard of a lot of out-of-town people. I'm not saying that there aren't some from in town, but I'm aware that a lot are from out of town.
Sheriff, were you anticipating that some of those armed individuals, armed groups would be out on the streets Tuesday night to confront protesters? Was law enforcement anticipating that?
I don't, our department and the people that were out there probably knew that. Again, my day from the minute I get up until the minute I fall asleep somewhere, there are certain things that I'm kind of privy to and enlightened on. I'm sure our staff knew that. I'm sure the law enforcement out there knew that because they could see them. And I'm sure that whoever's ever out in the field relayed that back to the command post.
But beforehand, because sometimes there's online chatter.
I'm sure that they did. I'm sure that they did. And again, the fact that they were out there isn't against the law. And the fact that The one picture that I saw, the suspect, he had a mask on, and again, I don't know what he was doing the rest of the time, so I don't know if other people saw him later. But the one I saw, he had a mask on, he had a baseball cap on, he had some kind of yellow or green shirt, and he looked young to me, but I couldn't have told you he was underage. So it was, I don't know if I answered your question.
Final question for Sheriff Beck?
Sheriff, I know your agency is not investigating the officer-involved shooting.
Then don't ask the question.
And I know that your deputies were not involved, but just as the top law enforcement official in this county, when you see that cell phone video,
Which one? I didn't see the cell phone video.
of the shooting of Jacob Blake,
Okay.
as the top law enforcement official in this county, do you see a problem just from that video of what that officer did?
I think I answered. I did not see the video.
You have never seen that cell phone video?
I'm sticking to the same thing I answered earlier. Yes, I
Do you
have
see a
not.
problem with that you haven't seen
Okay.
that video?
All right,
Thank you.
question for Sheriff Beth. I'll bring Chief Miskinnis back up to answer your question in the middle, and then we'll move on.
I have one follow-up for the chief as well after that first.
No more follow-ups. Right here in the middle.
Can you tell us what the status is of the 9 people who were arrested in relation to the situation at the Speedway gas station? It sounds like they were out-of-state plates. Have you discovered any more information about that?
I can address that in general. I don't have your details on it, but the Kenosha Police Department received a tip that there was a number of vehicles, 3, that were on the southwest side of town with out-of-state plates in a remote area, and it was deemed suspicious. We initiated surveillance with them and eventually made contact with a gas station across town where I believe they were fueling at a gas can. Don't quote me on that because I'm not necessarily sure, but I think that's what I recall hearing. In the course of identifying the occupants of 2 of the vehicles, the 3rd vehicle attempted to leave, disobeyed orders, wouldn't roll the windows down, would not cooperate with the investigation, and due to the actions of the driver, entry was made into the car. So that being done, they're investigating what's going on. They found shields, masks, illegal fireworks, some believed controlled substances, and we called for the assistance of ATF, who was in town. They provided a supporting role with that, and then the investigation remains ours. So they were arrested on the charges that pretty much what I just laid out for you.
What defines illegal fireworks? Like just too big, or?
Well, well, again, not with the details, but it may be a size, the amount of explosives involved in it. I don't have the details on that.
Where are they from?
Those from out of state, I don't recall which state it was from.
On Monday, 200 cars came down the interstate and were allowed to come through into this area. Is that, are cars going to be allowed?
I believe I was told that was one more question.
That's the last question for the chief. Thank you very much. Does anybody have questions for Mayor Antaramian? Anybody have questions for County Executive Cruiser?
I have a question for the mayor.
For the mayor, yes, go ahead.
Some organizations have called on you to ask the chief and the sheriff to resign amid all of this unrest and then the officer-involved shooting. Do you plan to ask them to do that?
No. I think that when you look at what has occurred over the last week and all the activities that are going on, everyone is doing the best they can with the situation they have, and I think both the chief and the sheriff clarified the situation that they, I think as to why people were making that request.
Mayor, if there are armed groups out this weekend, I mean, how do you want law enforcement to address that?
If I've made it really clear my opinion of armed militia out on the in the city. Do not want you here, do not expect you to be here, and you should stay away. And I think that's as clear as I can make it.
How do you want law enforcement to
Again, I think I just made it as clear as I am able to make it, and law enforcement will do their jobs.
Mayor, this church group that had $1,000 worth of essentially humanitarian supplies seized, will there be any attempt to return that property to those groups who have not been charged with crimes?
I will look into it. I do not know anything about it, though, to be honest with you.
Any other questions for Mayor Antaramian?
Thank you.